Good afternoon, everyone. Today we would like to take you through our journey of developing aid and finding a way of helping those in need. The UN has 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of which the first one is no poverty. A little bit of research reveals how big of a problem this really is, and this is where we wanted to help. Imagine for a moment the lives of the homeless, those who go to sleep without a roof over their head, have no warm food, no support or care. I'm sure you realize how difficult their life must be. Some of you are probably thinking, we have charities and shelters and day centers that provide the support that they need. We do, but not everyone accesses these resources. One of the most prevalent reasons being not everyone is aware of the best services available to support them. Now, this is where we wanted to help. Before we talk about our app, we would like to show you a short video clip that includes some of the conversations we had with homeless people.
Колко време си в Лондон? От 3 дена. 3 дни. Храна или... Последно, къде и кога? Не съм. Всичко не съм получавал. Дръжката, която е само не е нищо. Телефон си, до интернет, но карта интернет. Карти интернет,
No, I used to do shelters, but I got my things stolen. I got my mum and my grandma's pictures, which they're not here anymore, and I don't trust shelters anymore. People are in there with mental health. You find it hard to sleep in a place like that in case you not wake up. So I sleep by myself in Waterloo.
Dacă mă ajutați cu mare drag, vă mulțumesc foarte mult și sunt dator pentru Dumnezeu.
This is Paul. He's 42 years old. He came to London to look for a job, but unfortunately, due to the cost of living crisis, he fell into homelessness. He has no family here, but he has a pet dog. One day, through word of mouth, Paul heard about a shelter, and he decided to go visit that shelter. Unfortunately, his belongings were stolen at the shelter, so now he feels that he can no longer trust shelters, and he also finds it very difficult to hear about shelters that are. So he's chosen to go back to the streets and rely on people passing by for food and change. This is Louis. He's 28 years old, and he works at Salvation Army, which is a day center, and he only knows how to speak English. In his day-to-day job, Louis advises people that come in to seek support, and he gives them advice and support where possible, and if he's not able to provide them with advice and support, he will refer them to other services, and he normally does this through the Pavement magazine. We will discuss this in more detail later on, but it's basically a magazine that is distributed amongst the homeless that documents services available to them. And Louis' problem is he has no access to real-time information. So for example, he could refer someone to a shelter nearby and they could go to the shelter only to find that the shelter is at full capacity. But Louis couldn't have known this because he had no access to real-time information.
There are mainly two ways in which individuals experiencing homelessness now find out about services available to them. The primary method is word of mouth. This is good because homeless individuals can make better decisions based on other people's experiences. However, a problem is that there is no real-time information and they can't consider a wide range of services. They only know what the other person has told them, and that's about it. They can also use magazines such as The Pavement, which is good because it has a bi-monthly release and a lot of details about a wide range of services. However, once again, it suffers from a lack of real-time update. Many homeless people now have phones. Many homeless people can also access computer and Wi-Fi at day centers and shelters. Real-time information is sorely needed because many times homeless people have gone to places only to find out that they're closed or the service they want is no longer being offered.
So this brings us to our opportunity statement, which is how might we provide a method for individuals experiencing homelessness to access accurate information in real time so that they can reach trusted essential services to aid their journey off the streets.
Initially, we started with a very simple design. On a map, there were dots showing services. When you clicked on a dot, it would open up an information page corresponding to the service. Using feedback from homeless individuals and charities, we added more details to this information page, such as emails, website links, photos, and descriptions of the service being provided. On a map homepage, there are a lot of services. For clarity, we added filters such as type of service. This is because if a homeless individual only wanted to look for shelters, they could filter by shelter and only see shelters on the map. We also added a search bar so that homeless individuals could specifically look up a service that they might have either heard of by word of mouth or that they'd been before and wanted to visit again. For the availability feature, initially we had a numerical capacity so that homeless individuals could see exactly how many meals or spaces were left. However, charity said that this was too cumbersome to update while the service was open, so we changed this to having 4 categories of availability instead. As mentioned before, a big problem was that homeless people weren't sure if they could trust a service or not. So because of this, we added a reviews page where they could view reviews made by other individuals who'd been to the service and add a review themselves on whether they'd had a positive or negative experience. One problem was that there was no guarantee of being able to use the service once you got there. So we added a reservation feature so that homeless individuals would know they'd get the service such as a space or a meal when they got there. From the service provider side, when they went to manage their reservations, initially they could just see a list of reservations. However, they expressed a worry of people maybe not showing up. So to try and combat this, we added timestamps to the reservations, and charity providers could delete the reservation if a person hadn't turned up after a specified amount of time. We also changed the reservation codes from long numbers to memorable words appended with a 2-digit number to make it easier for rough sleepers to remember. This is particularly useful if the rough sleeper was using a device that they didn't own themselves outright, such as a public computer or someone else's phone. Some charity workers wanted to be able to offer their services on a first-come, first-served basis. So for this, we made the reservation feature optional, and the charity could choose to whether they wanted to allow it or not. Lastly, service providers were worried that people could leave bad reviews that they couldn't explain, and this would damage their reputation. So we added a feature when only the service provider could reply to reviews to clear up any misunderstandings. We'll now do a quick demo of our app.
Okay, so let us take a look at what Paul, a rough sleeper, can actually do in our app. So as he opens the app, he would then see a map view of the services available around him. And the icons here would represent the different types of services that the charity offers. For example, here we have a shelter, we have a day center, and food banks as well, whilst the colors would represent the current availability of the shelter and how busy it is. So Paul wants to search for a shelter. He wants to find a shelter to go to. He can then use this filter feature, and he would then filter it by shelter. And he notices that the Sloan Square shelter is the nearest shelter that is available to him. So he can then click on this shelter. And meanwhile, on the service provider side of the app, Daniel, which is a worker in the Sloan Square shelter, notices that the shelter is starting to get filled up and the availability is getting lower and lower. So what he can do as the service provider side, he can use the update availability feature, and he would update it to a low availability. And as he saves these changes, Paul would then be able to notice that it has a low availability. And what he decides to do is he would go back to the map view again, because he thinks that by the time he gets to the shelter, there would have been no more spaces left for him. So he also vaguely then remembers of another shelter that he'd heard before, and it's called Love Your Neighbor Shelter. What he can do then is he can search by name for Love Your Neighbor, and he can click on that service, and he notices the high availability of the shelter. He notices here as well that it is a pet-friendly shelter, so it's great that he can bring his pet dog as well along with him. And overall, he just thinks that this would be a good shelter to go to. However, at this point in time, Paul then remembers of his negative past experiences at the shelters he'd been to before, so he's a little bit wary about how much he trusts a shelter. But fortunately, with this app, he can go to the review section of the service, and in the review section, he then notices there's a good number of decent reviews, so Paul then decides to give the shelter a try. And aside from the reviews, Paul notices that this shelter also accepts a reservation. And what he can do, he can then click to reserve at this button, where he'll be prompted to enter his name or any other word if he's not comfortable with his name. But this word would then be a word that he has to remember to be referred to later. And as he makes the reservation, he can then make his way to the service, to the Love Your Neighbor service, noting down the address that he had seen before at the service information page. So now, as he arrives at the Love Your Neighbor shelter, Louis, which is a worker at the Love Your Neighbor shelter, meets Paul, who then tells Louis that he has made a reservation. And what Louis can do is he can click on Manage Reservation, where he sees that Paul has indeed made a reservation. He can then confirm this and by marking it for deletion. So Paul now gets a space at the shelter, and he can then rest well with warm food and shower for the night. So while staying at the shelter, Paul really appreciates all the assistance that the kind staff there has given to him, and he thinks that he really had a comfortable stay at the shelter. And after a few days, Paul decides to come back to the this app, and he comes back to the Love Your Neighbor page, where he decides to leave a review about his experiences at the shelter. And this is useful because he would then help other people like him who are also finding for shelters to be able to make better decisions about which services to use. So in the review, he would talk about how kind and caring the staff are. And he would then give the service a rating of 5 stars. Such. And meanwhile, on the other side, for Louis, Louis is then also able to manage the reviews for the service that he's working at, and he's able to see that Paul has a positive experience. So Louis is really grateful that he has had a positive experience at the shelter, and so Paul is able to find a shelter that he can trust, and Louis is able to help Paul do so via the Aid app.
For our hosting and deployment, we chose to use Firebase because it has great scalability and performance. It has a global CDN. And also, we hope to release our app on iOS and Android for better offline access, and it would also allow us to use integrated device features, such as, for example, for language translation. So for this project, we had 3 core values. Our first one was allowing homeless people to access all the support they need as easily as possible. Our second one was allowing charities to provide comprehensive information so people that want to use their services are able to do so without any confusion. And our third core value was to optimize this process of finding a service, and actually utilizing the service.
What is the user impact of our app? For individuals experiencing homelessness, it improves access to resources nearby, fosters trust in services, and facilitates informed decision making. For charities, they can learn how to improve their service from reading the reviews. It improves their visibility and it enhances communication between charities and homeless people via the review system and availability features. The wider impacts of our app is that it can also help people at risk of homelessness, aid the journey of individuals experiencing homelessness off the streets, and decrease the toll on the mental and physical health of homeless individuals.
Although we're officially done with our project at university, we still hope to continue developing our app. The first thing we hope to do is make their experience more customized. We could allow homeless people to create accounts, and based on the reservations they make, we could use machine learning models to recommend more resources and services that we think would be useful to them. The second thing we could do is involve members of the public, because some homeless people don't have access to phones or internet whatsoever. So members of the public could make reservations on their behalf, allowing them to go to shelters or reserve meals at food banks. And the third thing that we could do is also provide more information about employment and benefits. So have some kind of benefits calculator that tells homeless people what kind of benefits they're eligible to apply for, and also have an employment section to show them jobs that they could find. So it helps target their past, present, and future.